Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. The Prime Minister David Cameron and Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn have all come together to condemn the attacks in Paris where about 129 people were killed.
I want to start, Mr. Speaker, by expressing the horror of all those on this side of the House at the events in Paris on Friday evening, and our continued solidarity with the victims of all the people affected by conflict and terrorism, whether they be in Paris, Beirut, Ankara, Damascus, or anywhere else in the world. Nothing can justify targeting of innocent civilians by anyone. We know that at least one British national has been killed and many more injured. Many British people live and work in Paris. Millions visit Paris and France every year. Can the Prime Minister continue what he was saying earlier in response to my friend, the member for Blackpool, about the support given to British nationals affected by the attacks and what the government's latest advice is in travelling to France and our need to show the best possible normality in our relations with all the French people?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his remarks and say what a pleasure it was to be with him last night at the England-France football match, where I thought there was a tremendous display of solidarity. I'm sure they can sing the Marseillaise louder in the Stade de France, but I think we did a pretty good job yesterday, and I was proud to be there. I think he's absolutely right to say there is never any justification for terrorism, and we should all be clear about that right across the House at all times. He asked specifically about what more we can do to help British people caught up in these problems. I think Peter Ricketts, our ambassador in France, has done a brilliant job with his staff, and I've been keeping my eye closely on the consular situation, and I think everything that can be done is being done. In terms of our travel advice, it's all there on the Foreign Office website, but I agree with him. The most important thing is for people to carry on with their lives. It's very important that Eurostar continues to function, that flights continue to go, that people continue to travel, to enjoy London, to enjoy Paris, and to carry on going about our business. As we do so, yes, we need enhanced security, and that is happening with the way that the police are acting here in the UK and elsewhere, but one of the ways to defeat terrorism is to show them we will not be cowed.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that, sadly, after such atrocities as we've seen, intolerance often increases, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism and racism. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that it's vital that everyone in public life, particularly we as politicians, are careful how we discuss these issues? And will he also join with me in making it very clear that the dreadful events of terrorism in Paris have nothing in common whatsoever with the 2 million British Muslims in this country who are as appalled as anyone else by the events in Paris last Friday?
I'm happy to join the right honourable gentleman in that. In fact, some of the strongest and best statements following the Paris attacks have been made by a whole series of British Muslims coming together to say that these attacks are in no way carried out in their name. But I do think, and we talked about this yesterday, it raises an important issue, which is it cannot be said often enough that these butchers of ISIL are no reflection of the true religion of Islam, which is a religion of peace. But at the same time, we do have to recognise that whether these terrorists are in Tunisia or in Egypt or in Paris or in London, they spout the same bile that they claim comes from the religion of Islam. And that is why we have to take apart what they say and prove that's not the case. But it's not good enough to say there's no connection between these terrorists and Islam. They're making a connection. We need to prove it's not right. And as we do so, the support of Muslim communities, Muslim scholars, is absolutely vital, and I commend them for their work.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely a crucial way to help defeat ISIL is to cut off its funding, its supply of arms, and its trade. Can I press the Prime Minister to ensure that our allies in the region, indeed all countries in the region, are doing all they can to clamp down on individuals and institutions in their countries who are providing ISIL with vital infrastructure? Will he, through the European Union and other forums if necessary, consider sanctions against those banks and companies, and if necessary, countries who turn a blind eye to financial dealings with ISIL which assists them in their work?
No, well, we
Minister.
do play a leading role, as I said yesterday, in making sure that the supply of money and weapons and support is cut off. But I think we should be clear about where ISIL got their money from originally. What happened was that because we didn't have a government in Iraq that effectively represented all of its people, and because in Syria you have a leader who is butchering his own people, ISIL was able to get hold of oil, get hold of weapons, get hold of territory, get hold of banks, and it's that they've been able to use in order to fund their hatred and their violence. And so we cannot dodge forever the question of how to degrade and destroy ISIL both in Iraq and in Syria. And that's why I'll be setting out my response to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. So yes, go after the money, go after the banks, cut off their supplies, but don't make that a substitute for the action that's required to beat these people where they are.
US President Barack Obama has pledged greater support to France in its quest to fight terrorism and bring the perpetrators of the Paris attack to justice. The US President stated this while addressing a press conference in Turkey after the G20 meeting.
Of course, much of our attention has focused on the heinous attacks that took place in Paris. Across the world, in the United States, American flags are at half-staff in solidarity with our French allies. We're working closely with our French partners as they pursue their investigations and track down suspects. France is already a strong counterterrorism partner, and today we're announcing a new agreement. We're streamlining the process by which we share intelligence and operational military information with France. This will allow our personnel to pass threat information, including on ISIL, to our French partners even more quickly and more often, because we need to be doing everything we can to protect against more attacks and protect our citizens. Now, tragically, Paris is not alone. We've seen outrageous attacks by ISIL in Beirut, last month in Ankara, routinely in Iraq. Here at the G20, our nations have sent an unmistakable message that we are united against this threat. ISIL is the face of evil. Our goal, as I've said many times, is to degrade and ultimately destroy this barbaric terrorist organization. As I outlined this fall at the United Nations, we have a comprehensive strategy using all elements of our power: military, intelligence, economic, development, and the strength of our communities. We have always understood that this would be a long-term campaign. There will be setbacks and there will be successes. The terrible events in Paris were obviously a terrible and sickening setback. Even as we grieve with our French friends, however, we can't lose sight that there has been progress being made. On the military front, our coalition is intensifying our airstrikes, more than 8,000 to date. We're taking out ISIL leaders, commanders, their killers. We've seen that when we have an effective partner on the ground, ISIL can and is pushed back. So local forces in Iraq, backed by coalition air power, recently liberated Sinjar. Iraqi forces are fighting to take back Ramadi. In Syria, ISIL's been pushed back from much of the border region with Turkey. We've stepped up our support of opposition forces who are working to cut off supply lines to ISIL's strongholds in around Raqqa. So in short, both in Iraq and Syria, ISIL controls less territory than it did before. I made the point to my fellow leaders that if we want this progress to be sustained, more nations need to step up with the resources that this fight demands. Of course, the attacks in Paris remind us that it will not be enough to defeat ISIL in Syria and Iraq alone. Here in Antalya, our nations therefore committed to strengthening border controls, sharing more information, and stepping up our efforts to prevent the flow of foreign fighters in and out of Syria and Iraq. As the United States just showed in Libya, ISIL leaders will have no safe haven anywhere, and will continue to stand with leaders in Muslim communities, including faith leaders, who are the best voices to discredit ISIL's warped ideology. On the humanitarian front, our nations agreed that we have to do even more individually and collectively to address the agony of the Syrian people. The United States is already the largest donor of humanitarian aid to the Syrian people, some $4.5 billion in aid so far. As winter approaches, we're donating additional supplies, including clothing and generators, through the United Nations. But the UN appeal for Syria still has less than half the funds needed. Today, I'm again calling on more nations to contribute the resources that this crisis demands. In terms of refugees, it's clear that countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, which are already bearing an extraordinary burden, cannot be expected to do so alone. At the same time, all of our countries have to ensure our security. And as President, my first priority is the safety of the American people. And that's why even as we accept more refugees, including Syrians, we do so only after subjecting them to rigorous screening and security checks. We also have to remember that many of these refugees are the victims of terrorism themselves. That's what they're fleeing. Slamming the door in their faces would be a betrayal of our values. Our nations can welcome refugees who are desperately seeking safety and ensure our own security. We can and must do both. Finally, we've begun to see some modest progress on the diplomatic front, which is critical because a political solution is the only way to end the war in Syria and unite the Syrian people and the world against ISIL. The Vienna talks mark the first time that all the key countries have come together, as a result, I would add, of American leadership, and reached a common understanding. With this weekend's talks, there's a path forward. Negotiations between the Syrian opposition and the Syrian regime under the auspices of the United Nations, a transition toward a more inclusive representative government, a new constitution followed by free elections, and alongside this political process, a ceasefire in the civil war, even as we continue to fight against ISIL.
Following the deadly attacks in Paris, a political discussion on admitting Syrian refugees into the U.S. has heightened. Many Republicans are questioning President Obama's plan to admit 10,000 Syrian asylum seekers into the country.
Horrific carnage in France could be repeated on American soil if terrorists infiltrate U.S.-bound refugees, according to the president's Republican critics.
This country can see that kind of thing happening here.
Sessions wants to halt the arrival of Syrian refugees until Congress can vote on whether to admit them at all.
If you're not able to do a background check sufficiently, vet the applicants, you're not able to do that, then you're going to be admitting a certain number of people who have terrorist tendencies.
Democrats note that those seeking refuge in the United States are subjected to background checks that take months or even years.
The vetting process involves many agencies. It takes a long period of time, and we do make sure that they have no affiliations with any terrorist organizations and certainly not involved with ISIL.
Republicans want to know how any refugee from a failed state or a war zone like Syria can be properly vetted.
When you have a country that there's no central database to pull from, how in fact do you know what the backgrounds of these individuals are?
A House Democrat says utmost care is warranted.
I don't want terrorists to come here masquerading as refugees. And I think we have to be very, very, very careful who we admit to this country. But I think a blanket slamming the door and having zero compassion whatsoever is not the way to go.
Cardin agrees.
We have a very open society. We're not going to let the terrorists win and change our way, the way that we operate our country.
The issue is gaining attention far from Washington. More than 20 Republican governors have said they do not want Syrian refugees settled in their states.
Meanwhile, investigations have revealed that a neighborhood in Brussels is at the heart of last week's attacks in Paris. Belgium has seen more of its nationals live to fight for the Islamic State terror. Two of the Paris attackers are known to have grown up in the Brussels suburb.
Abdelhamid Aboud, believed to be the mastermind of the Paris attacks, grew up in the Molenbeek district of Brussels. Fellow militant Brahim Abdeslam, who blew himself up outside a Paris cafe, owned this bar in Molenbeek. His brother Salah, another of the attackers, is being hunted by police. Intelligence analysts say the neighborhood has become a breeding ground for extremists.
Molenbeek est une commune qui a été longtemps laissée, je dirais presque à l'abandon. Et dans cette population,
Molenbeek is a commune that has been abandoned. There is a radical fringe, not very large, but real, and it has existed for 20 or 30 years. So we saw people settle in Molenbeek who have become sort of leaders of radical Islam not only in Belgium but also in Europe.
Police have carried out several raids across Molenbeek. Residents say they feel under siege from all sides.
Now we have to watch the young people. I don't know what's going on in their heads. I just don't know.
In 2001, the assassins of Afghanistan's anti-Taliban commander Ahmad Shah Massoud had stayed in Molenbeek. One of the main plotters of the 2004 Madrid train bombings lived in the district. In 2014, 4 people were killed in a gun attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels. The main suspect had stayed in Molenbeek. And Ayoub El Kazani, who attempted to carry out a gun attack on a Paris-bound train in August that was foiled by off-duty US servicemen, had stayed in the same neighborhood.
Belgium has a huge problem of its nationals getting radicalized. Many have joined as volunteers for ISIS and even Jabhat al-Nusra.
Analyst Sajan Gohel says terrorists are exploiting Europe's open borders.
We are seeing a nexus develop between Belgium and France for terrorist-related activity and exploited by ISIS.
Belgium's foreign minister was asked this week if the country is a weak link in the fight against terror.
I don't want to answer that. We are a strong link. We are trying to fight very effectively.
Authorities say they have foiled several terrorist attacks, but pressure is growing on Belgium to crack down harder on Islamist extremism in the political heart of Europe.
So we will conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of it. I am Tunde Alabi, and do have a very safe and beautiful week ahead of you. Bye. As part of our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom, our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You know you can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, your voice, your opinion on our TV.